The screech of splintering wood tore through the mountain air as the stagecoach lurched sideways, wheels spinning uselessly over the cliff edge, and Adelaide Vance knew she was about to die. The horses screamed in terror, their hooves scraping against loose rock as the entire vehicle tilted at an impossible angle. She clutched the leather seat, her knuckles white, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst through her ribs. Then strong hands grabbed her waist, yanking her through the door just as the coach broke free and tumbled down the rocky slope below, exploding into 1,000 pieces against the boulders far beneath. "I have got you," a deep voice said against her ear, breathless and strained. "Hold on to me." Adelaide could not breathe, could not think. Her body was pressed against something solid and warm, and she was moving, being carried away from the crumbling edge of the mountain pass. Her rescuer's boots crunched against gravel and stone, each step deliberate and careful, despite the obvious urgency. She finally managed to look up and saw the sharp line of a jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, intense blue eyes focused on the treacherous path ahead, and dark hair that curled slightly beneath the brim of a worn leather hat. The cowboy driver. The man who had been guiding the stagecoach from Flagstaff toward Snowflake, Arizona, had just saved her life. He did not stop moving until they were well away from the unstable section of the pass. Only then did he carefully lower her to her feet, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, as if to make certain she could stand on her own. Adelaide's legs trembled beneath her skirts, and she grabbed his arm to steady herself. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than the near-death experience. I do not think so," Adelaide managed, her voice shaking. She looked down at herself, taking inventory. Her traveling dress was dusty and torn at the hem, but she appeared to be intact. "What about the horses, did they?" His expression darkened. "Gone, went over with the coach." He turned to look back at the cliff edge, his jaw tight. "Damn wheels gave out on the bad section. I have driven this route 100 times and never had trouble, but the spring rains must have weakened the road more than anyone realized." Adelaide followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. The broken remnants of the stagecoach were barely visible far below, scattered among the rocks like a child's abandoned toys. Everything she owned had been in that coach. Her trunk with all her clothes, the small box of her mother's jewelry, the letters from her aunt in Snowflake who had invited her to come live there after Adelaide's father died 6 months ago. All of it was gone. "We are alive," the cowboy said, as if reading her thoughts. "That is what matters." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, surveying their surroundings. "We are about 15 miles from Snowflake, maybe 12 from the last way station we passed. Sun will be setting in a few hours." "What do we do?" Adelaide asked, hating how small her voice sounded. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "I get you to safety, miss. That is what I do." He held out his hand. "Name is Donovan. I have been driving coaches for the Butterfield line for 3 years now. Never lost a passenger yet, and I do not intend to start today." Adelaide took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Adelaide Vance and I, thank you, you saved my life. Just doing my job, Miss Vance." But the way he said her name, soft and careful, made it feel like more than that. The reality of their situation settled over them like dust. They were stranded on a mountain pass in northern Arizona territory in late April of 1882, with no supplies, no horses, and night approaching. Adelaide was wearing a traveling dress completely unsuited for hiking through rough terrain, and while Asher appeared capable and strong, he was just one man. Can we make it to the way station before dark? She asked. Asher studied the sky, then the path behind them. Not likely. And going back means harder terrain. Forward toward Snowflake is the better choice, but we will need to find shelter for the night. He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. Drink. We need to start moving while we still have good light. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Adelaide had not realized how dry her mouth had become until that moment. She took several long swallows before handing it back to Asher, who drank as well before securing it again. I am not exactly dressed for a mountain hike, Adelaide said, lifting her skirts slightly to show her impractical button-up boots. No, you are not, Asher agreed. But we will go slow. I will help you. He glanced at her again, and she saw something like admiration in his eyes. You are holding up better than most would after what just happened. I do not feel like I am holding up at all, Adelaide admitted. I feel like I might fall apart at any moment. But you have not. That is what counts. He adjusted his gun belt and started walking, looking back to make sure she was following. Tell me about yourself, Miss Vance. It will help pass the time and keep your mind off your feet. Adelaide picked up her skirts and began walking, trying to find the smoothest path through the rocky trail. There is not much to tell. I am 22 years old, originally from Philadelphia. My father was a banker. He died this past winter, and my Aunt Margaret in Snowflake wrote to invite me to come live with her. She runs a boarding house there. Long way from Philadelphia, Asher observed. He walked slightly ahead of her, testing the ground before gesturing for her to follow. What made you decide to come? There was nothing left for me there, Adelaide said simply. My mother died when I was 15. I have no siblings. After father died, I realized I was entirely alone in a city full of people. My aunt's letter arrived at just the right time, or what I thought was the right time. She laughed, but it came out brittle. Now I am not so certain. You are alive and you will get to Snowflake, Asher said firmly. Might take us an extra day, but we will get there. He paused to help her over a particularly rough section where the trail narrowed. His hand was warm and steady in hers. What about you? Adelaide asked as they continued. How does a man become a stagecoach driver? Asher was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the path ahead. Grew up in Texas, on a small ranch outside San Antonio. My father wanted me to be a rancher like him, but I had other ideas. Wanted to see more of the territory, not spend my whole life in one place. So I left when I was 18, worked odd jobs, learned to handle horses and wagons. Eventually ended up driving for Butterfield. It is decent work and I get to see new places, meet new people. You have family back in Texas. A younger sister, Emma. She is married now, has 2 children. My parents both passed a few years back. He glanced back at her. So I understand about being alone. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional call of a bird. The sun was lower now, painting the rocks in shades of orange and gold. Adelaide's feet were beginning to hurt and she could feel blisters forming, but she did not complain. Asher was right. They needed to cover as much ground as possible while they could still see. There, Asher said suddenly, pointing ahead. See that outcropping? Looks like there might be an overhang. Could provide shelter for the night. Adelaide squinted and could just make out what he was indicating. It did not look like much, but it was better than sleeping exposed on the mountain. How much farther? Maybe half a mile. Can you make it? She nodded, though her feet screamed in protest. I can make it. Asher slowed his pace, staying closer to her now. Several times he offered his arm when the path became particularly treacherous, and Adelaide found herself grateful for his presence in a way that went beyond mere survival. There was something steady about him, something reassuring. He had not panicked when the coach went over. He had acted, saved her, and now he was taking care of her with a quiet competence that made her feel safe despite their circumstances. By the time they reached the outcropping, the sun was touching the horizon. Asher helped Adelaide up onto the rocky ledge and then followed, immediately beginning to survey their shelter. It was better than Adelaide had hoped. The overhang created a shallow cave about 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide, with a relatively flat floor. It would protect them from wind and any rain, though the nights could still get cold in the mountains this time of year. "Not bad," Asher said, nodding in approval. "I have slept in worse places." He began gathering loose rocks to create a fire ring. "There is enough deadwood around here to make a small fire. It will keep us warm and keep any animals away." Adelaide sank down onto a flat rock, finally allowing herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion. Her whole body ached, and when she carefully removed her boots, she winced at the sight of the blisters already formed on her heels and toes. Asher looked over and frowned. "Let me see." "They are just blisters," Adelaide protested, but he was already kneeling in front of her. "Just blisters that could get infected if we are not careful," he countered. He pulled a bandana from his pocket, clean and folded. "We will wrap them for now. Tomorrow we need to find water, both for drinking and to clean these properly." His hands were gentle as he tore the bandana into strips and carefully wrapped her feet. Adelaide found herself watching his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression, the way he was so careful not to hurt her. When he looked up and caught her staring, she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are welcome." He stood and went back to building the fire. "Why do not you rest while I get this going? Once we have some warmth, you will feel better." Adelaide leaned back against the rock wall and watched him work. He moved with practiced efficiency, arranging stones, gathering wood, using flint and steel from his pocket to create sparks. Within minutes, a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Asher sat down across from her, his back against the opposite wall, and pulled out his canteen again. "We need to ration this. There is enough for tonight and tomorrow morning, but we need to find water tomorrow." "There must be streams in these mountains," Adelaide said. "There are." "We will find one." He took a small sip and then offered the canteen to her. Not too much, just enough to take the edge off. They shared the water in silence, the fire crackling between them. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped, and Adelaide found herself shivering despite the flames. "Come over here," Asher said, gesturing to the space beside him. "We need to share body heat. I know it is not proper, but neither is freezing to death." Adelaide hesitated for only a moment before moving to sit next to him. Asher removed his duster coat and wrapped it around both of them, pulling her close against his side. The warmth of him was immediate and welcome, and Adelaide found herself relaxing into his embrace despite the impropriety of it all. "Better?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Much better," she admitted. "I was colder than I wanted to admit." They sat like that as the fire burned low, not talking, just existing together in the quiet darkness. Adelaide could hear Asher's steady heartbeat, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. It should have felt awkward or uncomfortable, being pressed against a man she had only met hours ago, but instead it felt natural. Right, somehow. "Tell me about Snowflake," Asher said eventually. "What do you know about it?" "Not much, truthfully. My aunt says it is a small settlement, mostly Mormon families. They farm and raise cattle. It is named after two of the founders, Erastus Snow and William Flake. She says it is peaceful, a good place to start over." "It is a decent town," Asher confirmed. "I have passed through it many times." "Your aunt is right. It is peaceful, might be a bit quiet after Philadelphia, though." Adelaide laughed softly. "I think quiet sounds wonderful right now. Fair enough. She felt him shift slightly, adjusting his position to be more comfortable. What were you going to do there? Help your aunt with the boarding house. That was the plan. I can cook and clean and keep accounts. I thought I might be useful to her. Adelaide paused. It felt better than staying in Philadelphia, living on charity or trying to find work as a governess or seamstress. At least in Snowflake I would have family. Family is important, Asher agreed. Even if it is just one person, having someone who cares about you makes all the difference. They fell silent again, and Adelaide found her eyelids growing heavy. The warmth of Asher beside her, the sound of his breathing, the exhaustion of the day, all combined to pull her toward sleep. She tried to fight it, feeling like she should stay alert, but her body had other ideas. Sleep, Asher said quietly. I will keep watch. You are safe. And somehow, despite everything, Adelaide believed him. She let her head rest against his shoulder and closed her eyes, surrendering to the exhaustion. Just before sleep claimed her completely, she felt Asher's arm tighten around her, protective and warm. Adelaide woke to pale dawn light filtering into the cave and the smell of smoke from the dead fire. For a moment she was disoriented, wondering why she was so stiff and sore, and then memory came flooding back. The stagecoach, the crash, Asher. She was still tucked against his side, his coat still wrapped around them both. Asher's head was tipped back against the rock wall, his eyes closed, finally sleeping. Adelaide carefully shifted to look at him without waking him. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his late 20s, with strong features and sun-weathered skin that spoke of a life spent outdoors. There were tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into bright sunlight. His dark hair was tousled, and a lock of it fell across his forehead. He was, Adelaide realized with a start, quite handsome. As if sensing her scrutiny, Asher's eyes opened. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and Adelaide saw something flicker in his blue eyes, something that made her breath catch. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Adelaide replied. "Did you sleep at all? Enough?" He sat up straighter, gently extricating himself from their shared position. "We should get moving. The sooner we start, the sooner we reach Snowflake." He stood and stretched, his joints popping. "How are your feet?" Adelaide carefully pulled on her boots, trying not to wince. "Sore, but I can walk." "Good." Asher kicked dirt over the remains of the fire and then helped Adelaide to her feet. "We follow this trail northeast. Should come across a stream within a few miles if I remember correctly. We can refill the canteen and clean your feet properly." They set out as the sun climbed higher, warming the cool morning air. Adelaide's body protested every step, muscles she had not known she had aching from yesterday's ordeal and uncomfortable sleep. But she kept moving, focusing on Asher's back ahead of her, on putting one foot in front of the other. True to his word, they found a stream around mid-morning. It was small but clear, bubbling over smooth rocks as it made its way down the mountain. Asher immediately knelt beside it, drinking deeply before filling the canteen. Adelaide joined him, cupping her hands to bring the cold water to her lips. It tasted clean and fresh, and she drank until her stomach felt full. "Sit down," Asher instructed, gesturing to a fallen log. "Let me look at those feet." Adelaide sat and carefully removed her boots and stockings. The blisters had gotten worse overnight, some of them now open and weeping. Asher made a low sound of concern in his throat. "This is going to hurt, but it has to be done," he warned before carefully washing each foot in the cold stream water. Adelaide bit her lip to keep from crying out. It did hurt, sharp and stinging, but she knew he was right. "I wish I had proper bandages, but we will make do." He used more strips from his bandana, this time wetting them first before wrapping her feet. "That should help a bit," We will go slower today. We cannot afford to go slower, Adelaide protested. We need to reach Snowflake. We will reach it, Asher said firmly. But not if you cannot walk at all. We go at a pace you can handle. They continued on, following the stream for a while before the trail diverged from it. The sun climbed higher, and Adelaide was grateful that April in the mountains was not as brutally hot as summer would be. Still, by midday she was sweating and struggling, her feet screaming with every step. Asher kept looking back at her, his expression growing more concerned. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her fully. "This is not working. You are hurting too much." "I am fine," Adelaide insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. "No, you are not." He studied her for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Come here." "What? I am going to carry you." "You cannot carry me all the way to Snowflake," Adelaide protested. "That is ridiculous." "I am not planning to carry you the whole way, but I can carry you for a while, give your feet a rest. Then you can walk again when you have recovered a bit." He turned his back to her and crouched down. "Climb on." Adelaide hesitated, but the throbbing pain in her feet made the decision for her. She carefully climbed onto his back, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as he stood, his hands securely gripping her thighs to hold her in place. "You are not as heavy as a saddle," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I have carried heavier things farther." "That is hardly reassuring," Adelaide said, but she could not help smiling a little herself. Asher began walking, his stride steady and sure despite the added weight. Adelaide rested her cheek against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt, the strength in his movements. She should have felt embarrassed, being carried like a child, but instead she felt cared for, protected. "Tell me more about Philadelphia," Asher said as he walked. "What was it like growing up there?" Adelaide thought back to her childhood, to memories that seemed like they belonged to a different person now. "Busy. Crowded. My father worked long hours at the bank, but when he was home, he made time for me. He taught me to read and to do figures. My mother was very proper, very concerned with what people thought. She wanted me to marry well to move up in society." "And did you?" "Marry well, I mean." "I never married at all," Adelaide said. "There were suitors, men my mother approved of, but none of them felt right. After she died, Father stopped pushing me toward marriage. I think he liked having me at home taking care of him. And then he got sick, and suddenly years had passed and I was still unmarried and alone." "Do you regret it, not marrying?" Adelaide considered the question. "Sometimes. It would be easier, having a husband, a home of my own. But I could never bring myself to marry someone I did not love, just for the sake of being married. That seemed worse than being alone." "That is brave," Asher said quietly. "Most women do not have that choice, or if they do not take it. My father left me a small inheritance. Not much, but enough that I was not completely desperate, though it is all gone now, spent on his medical care and the journey out here." She paused. "Everything I had left was in that trunk." "We will get you sorted out in Snowflake," Asher assured her. "Your aunt will help you and there are good people there. You will be all right." They walked in silence for a while, Asher's steady footsteps eating up the distance. Adelaide found herself noticing small things about him. The way his hair curled at the nape of his neck, the faint scent of leather and smoke that clung to him, the easy strength with which he carried her as if her weight was nothing. "What about you?" Adelaide asked eventually. "Have you ever been married?" "No, came close once when I was younger. Girl back in Texas, daughter of our nearest neighbor. Everyone assumed we would marry, and I think I assumed it too. But when the time came to actually propose, I realized I did not love her, not the way a man should love his wife. So I left instead." He shifted her weight slightly, adjusting his grip. "She married someone else within 6 months. Think I did us both a favor." Do you ever think about settling down? Having a family? Sometimes, Asher admitted. But the life of a stagecoach driver is not exactly conducive to family life. Always moving, never in one place for long, would not be fair to a wife or children. You could do something else, Adelaide suggested. You obviously know horses and wagons. You could work at a stable or a freight company or even have your own ranch like your father wanted. Maybe, Asher said, but he did not sound convinced. Never really thought about it seriously. By afternoon, Asher had to set Adelaide down. Even his considerable strength had limits. But the rest had helped her feet considerably, and she was able to walk again, though slowly. They stopped frequently to drink from the canteen and rest, and Asher shared some jerky he had in his pocket, which they split between them. It was tough and salty, but Adelaide was hungry enough not to care. "We are making good time," Asher said, studying their surroundings. "If we can keep this pace, we should reach Snowflake by tomorrow afternoon." "Another night in the mountains," Adelaide said, "afraid so, but we will find another good spot, build another fire. It will be all right." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon once more, Asher started scouting for shelter. This time he found a cluster of large boulders that formed a natural windbreak, with enough space between them for a small camp. It was not as good as the cave, but it would do. They went through the same routine as the night before. Asher built a fire while Adelaide rested her aching feet. They shared the last of the jerky and water from the canteen, knowing they would find more water tomorrow. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they huddled together again under Asher's coat, the fire burning between them and the boulder wall. "Thank you," Adelaide said softly, "for everything. I know I have said it before, but I do not think I have properly expressed how grateful I am. You could have left me, saved yourself, but you did not." "I would never leave you," Asher said, and there was something fierce in his tone. "From the moment I pulled you from that coach, I promised myself I would get you to safety. That is exactly what I intend to do." Adelaide turned to look at him, their faces close in the firelight. "You are a good man, Asher Donovan." "Just a man doing what is right," he replied, but his eyes were intense, searching her face. "Adelaide, He trailed off, seeming to struggle with something. Adelaide waited, her heart beating faster, sensing that whatever he was about to say was important. "I know we have only known each other for a day and a half," Asher continued slowly. "And I know the circumstances are unusual. But I need to tell you something, even if it is not the right time or place." "What is it?" Adelaide asked, though she thought she might already know. "I feel something for you," Asher said, the words coming out in a rush. "Since the moment I saw you climb into that stagecoach yesterday morning in Flagstaff, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. And then, when the coach started to go over and I grabbed you, all I could think was that I could not let anything happen to you. Not just because you were my passenger, but because I care about you. I know it is crazy, I know it does not make sense, but it is true." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She should have been shocked, should have protested that he was right and it was too soon and they barely knew each other. But instead, all she felt was a warm flood of relief and recognition. "It is not crazy," she said softly, "because I feel it too." Asher stared at her, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. "You do?" "Yes. I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or the shock of what happened or the fact that you saved my life. But it is more than that." Adelaide reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "When I am with you, I feel safe. Not just physically safe, but safe in a deeper way. Like I can be myself, like I do not have to pretend or hide. I have known you for barely 2 days, and yet I feel like I have known you much longer." "Adelaide," Asher breathed her name like a prayer. He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I do not know what the future holds. I do not know how we make this work, but I know I do not want to let you go." "Then do not," Adelaide said simply. Asher set their hands down gently and cupped her face with his palm, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Can I kiss you?" Instead of answering, Adelaide closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. But then Asher's arm came around her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and real and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I was not expecting this when I started driving that route yesterday." Adelaide laughed softly. "Neither was I. I thought I was going to start a quiet new life in a small town, maybe find some peace. Instead, I nearly died, lost everything I owned, and fell in love with a cowboy." "You love me?" Asher asked, his voice rough with emotion. Adelaide pulled back to look at him properly, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. This strong, capable man who had carried her across mountains was asking her if she loved him, as if he could not quite believe it could be true. "Yes," she said firmly. "I love you, Asher Donovan. It does not make sense, and it is far too soon, and I cannot explain it. But I do." "I love you too," Asher said. And then he was kissing her again, and Adelaide lost herself in the warmth of him, in the rightness of being in his arms. They held each other as the fire burned low, exchanging soft kisses and softer words, making quiet promises about a future neither of them had planned, but both wanted desperately. Eventually they settled down to sleep, wrapped around each other under the coat, Adelaide's head on Asher's chest, his arms securely around her. "Tomorrow we reach Snowflake," Asher murmured into her hair. "And then we figure out the rest. Together," Adelaide said. "Together," Asher agreed, and Adelaide fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, steady and sure beneath her ear. They woke early the next morning, eager to complete their journey. Adelaide's feet were still sore but manageable, and they made good progress through the morning. Around midday, the landscape began to change, becoming less rocky and more open. They could see the valley below, and in the distance, the scattered buildings of Snowflake. "There," Asher said, pointing. "That is where you are going." Adelaide felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation. She was glad to be so close to safety and civilization, but she also knew that reaching Snowflake would change things. Out here, it had been just the two of them against the world. In town, there would be other people, expectations, reality. "What happens when we get there?" she asked quietly. Asher took her hand. "We tell your aunt what happened. I report the loss of the coach to the company, and then we figure out how to build a life together." Just like that," Asher confirmed. "Adelaide, I meant what I said last night. I am not letting you go. I do not care that we have only known each other a few days. I do not care that it is fast or unconventional. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I am going to do whatever it takes to make this work." "I want that too," Adelaide said. "But Asher, you have a job. You drive stagecoaches. You are supposed to travel, to never stay in one place." "Then I will quit," Asher said simply. "I will find other work. Adelaide, I told you yesterday that the life of a driver is not good for a family. Well, I want a family. With you. So I will do whatever I have to do to make that possible." They walked the last few miles hand in hand, planning and dreaming and occasionally stopping to kiss, unable to help themselves. By the time they reached the outskirts of Snowflake in the late afternoon, Adelaide felt exhausted but hopeful. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Snowflake was a small settlement, exactly as Adelaide's aunt had described. There were perhaps 24 buildings clustered around a main street, with farms spreading out from the center. The town had a peaceful, settled feel to it, and Adelaide could see why her aunt had suggested she come here. "Where is your aunt's boarding house?" Asher asked. "On Main Street," she said. "White building with a blue door." They made their way through the town, drawing curious looks from the few people they passed. Adelaide knew they must make quite a sight, dusty and worn from days in the mountains, but she was too tired to care. The boarding house was exactly as described. Asher knocked on the blue door, and moments later it opened to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with gray-streaked brown hair and kind eyes. Her expression went from curious to shocked to overjoyed in the space of seconds. "Adelaide," she gasped. "Oh, my dear girl, you are here. But what happened?" "You look like you have been dragged through the wilderness, Aunt Margaret," Adelaide said, and suddenly found herself being pulled into a warm embrace. All the fear and exhaustion and emotion of the past few days came flooding out, and she found herself crying into her aunt's shoulder. "There now, you are safe," Margaret soothed, stroking Adelaide's hair. "Come inside, both of you. You need food and rest and proper care." She ushered them into the boarding house, still exclaiming over their appearance. What on earth happened? Over the next hour, sitting in Margaret's comfortable kitchen with hot food and coffee in front of them, Adelaide and Asher explained everything. The stagecoach accident, the loss of the horses and Adelaide's belongings, their journey across the mountains. Margaret listened with growing horror and amazement. "Mercy," she said when they finished. "You could have both been killed. Thank the Lord you are safe." She looked at Asher with new respect. "Young man, you saved my niece's life. I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary, madam," Asher said. "I was just doing what needed to be done." Margaret studied him shrewdly, then looked between him and Adelaide, who were still sitting close together, their hands intertwined on the table. "I see," she said slowly, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "And I suppose in all that time alone in the mountains, the two of you became acquainted." Adelaide felt herself blush. "Aunt Margaret, I love your niece," Asher said bluntly, cutting through any awkwardness. "I know we have only just met, and I know this is not how these things are usually done, but I intend to marry her if she will have me." Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "Well, you certainly do not mince words, do you? No point in it, madam. Life is too short." Asher looked at Adelaide. "I should have asked you properly first, but since I am being honest with your aunt, I might as well be completely honest." He turned back to Adelaide, taking both her hands in his. "Adelaide Vance, will you marry me?" Adelaide's heart felt like it might burst. "Yes," she said, not caring that her aunt was watching, not caring that this was all happening so fast. "Yes, I will marry you," Margaret laughed, a delighted sound. "Well, this is certainly more excitement than Snowflake usually sees. But I can see you two are serious about this, and I have always believed in following the heart." She stood and went to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of something amber-colored. "This calls for a celebration, small as it may be." She poured them each a small glass of what turned out to be apple brandy, and they toasted to the engagement, to survival, to new beginnings. Adelaide could not stop smiling, and every time she looked at Asher, she found him looking back at her with the same joy and wonder she felt. After they finished their drinks, Margaret showed Asher to a room where he could wash and rest, and then took Adelaide to another room, this one clearly prepared for her arrival. "I had hoped you would take this room," Margaret said. "It is small but comfortable. I will find you some clothes to replace what you lost. We are about the same size, and I have more than I need." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret, for everything." Margaret hugged her again. "You are family, dear girl. That is what we do for family." She pulled back and looked at Adelaide seriously. "Now about this young man. Are you certain about this? I can see you care for him, but marriage is a serious matter. I have never been more certain of anything, Adelaide said. I know it seems rash, but Margaret, when I am with him, everything feels right. He is good and kind and strong, and he makes me feel like I can do anything. I love him. Then that is enough for me, Margaret said. Tomorrow we will start making arrangements, but tonight you both need to rest and recover. You have been through an ordeal. Adelaide bathed in a copper tub filled with warm water, washing away days of dust and grime. Margaret had laid out a simple cotton nightgown and a wrapper, and Adelaide gratefully put them on before climbing into the soft bed. It felt like heaven after sleeping on hard ground. But despite her exhaustion, Adelaide could not sleep. Her mind was racing with everything that had happened, with plans for the future, with thoughts of Asher. Was he sleeping? Was he thinking of her? A soft tap on her door answered that question. Adelaide rose and opened it to find Asher standing there, also freshly washed, wearing a borrowed nightshirt that was slightly too small on his broad frame. I could not sleep, he said quietly. Kept thinking about you. I was thinking about you too, Adelaide admitted. They stood there in the hallway for a moment, and then Asher stepped forward, cupping her face and kissing her softly. I just needed to see you to make sure this was all real and not some dream. It is real, Adelaide promised. We are real. Good. He kissed her again, deeper this time. I should go back to my room before your aunt catches me here and changes her mind about approving of me. Adelaide laughed softly, probably wise. Good night, Adelaide, my fiancée. Good night, Asher, my fiancé. He kissed her one more time before reluctantly pulling away and heading back to his own room. Adelaide closed her door and leaned against it, touching her lips where he had kissed her, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. The next morning, Asher went to the Butterfield office in town to report the loss of the stagecoach and horses. The manager was sympathetic but thorough, wanting all the details of the accident. He assured Asher that no blame would fall on him, as the road conditions had clearly been at fault, but he would need to stay in Snowflake for a few days while they sorted out the details and arranged for investigation of the site. When Asher returned to the boarding house, he found Adelaide and Margaret in the kitchen, making plans. Adelaide's eyes lit up when she saw him, and Asher felt his heart swell. Even in borrowed clothes that did not quite fit, with her hair simply braided down her back, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The company wants me to stay in town for a few days, Asher reported. After that, I need to give them a decision about whether I am continuing as a driver or leaving the company. And what will you tell them? Margaret asked. That I am done driving, Asher said firmly. I am staying in Snowflake. You are certain? Adelaide asked. Asher, I do not want you to give up your livelihood for me if you are going to regret it. I will not regret it, Asher assured her. He came to stand beside her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. Adelaide, I have been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I did not even realize I was looking for a home until I found you. You are my home now. Wherever you are is where I want to be. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with her apron. That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard. Over the next few days, things fell into place with surprising ease. Asher found work at the local freight company, using his skills with horses and wagons to help transport goods between Snowflake and the surrounding settlements. The pay was steady if not extravagant, and the owner, a gruff man named Thomas Burke, liked Asher's straightforward manner and work ethic. Adelaide settled into life at the boarding house, helping Margaret with cooking and cleaning, and getting to know the handful of regular boarders. She also started offering to help with bookkeeping for some of the local businesses, using the skills her father had taught her. It was not much, but it was a start. And every evening when work was done, Asher would come to the boarding house and he and Adelaide would sit on the front porch, talking and planning their future. They decided to have a small wedding as soon as could be arranged, not wanting to wait any longer than necessary. Margaret threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm, enlisting the help of the other women in town. One of them, a talented seamstress named Mrs. Porter, offered to make Adelaide a wedding dress. "You lost everything in that accident, dear," she said kindly. "The least we can do is make sure you have a proper dress for your wedding day." Adelaide was touched by the generosity and warmth of the people of Snowflake. In Philadelphia, she had been alone in a crowd. Here, in this small settlement, she felt like she belonged. 3 weeks after the Stagecoach accident, Adelaide Vance married Asher Donovan in the small church in Snowflake. Adelaide wore a simple but beautiful dress of white cotton with delicate lace trim. Asher wore new trousers and a shirt he had purchased with his first pay from the freight company, and he had never looked more handsome. The ceremony was attended by Margaret, several of the boarding house residents, Asher's new employer and some of his co-workers, and a number of townspeople who had been following the romantic story of the couple who fell in love after a stagecoach crash. The preacher, a kind elderly man named Reverend Kimball, spoke about providence and the mysterious ways that love finds us when we least expect it. When Asher kissed his bride for the first time as husband and wife, there was not a dry eye in the church. Margaret had given them the largest room in the boarding house as a wedding present, one with a proper bed and a window overlooking the mountains. That night, as Adelaide lay in Asher's arms for the first time as his wife, she thought about how different her life had turned out from anything she had imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, stroking her hair. "About how strange life is," Adelaide said. "A month ago I was in Philadelphia, alone and uncertain about my future. I got on that stagecoach thinking I was going to start a quiet, simple life. And instead I almost died and met you and fell in love, and now here I am, married, happy." "Are you happy?" Asher asked softly. "Incredibly happy," Adelaide assured him. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Asher said. He pulled her down for a kiss. "I love you, Mrs. Donovan. I love you too, Mr. Donovan." The first months of their marriage were an adjustment as they learned to live together, to navigate each other's habits and quirks. Asher was an early riser who liked strong coffee and quiet mornings. Adelaide was more of a night person who could stay up late reading by lamplight. But they found their rhythm, compromising and adapting, always choosing each other. Asher's work at the freight company went well. He proved to be reliable and skilled, and within a few months, Thomas Burke made him a partner in the business. It was not a huge promotion, but it meant steady income and a voice in how the company was run. Asher came home that evening grinning like a fool and swept Adelaide up in his arms, spinning her around the room while she laughed and protested. Adelaide's bookkeeping work also expanded. Several of the local businesses began using her services, appreciating her neat hand and quick mind for numbers. She worked from a small desk in their room, carefully keeping accounts for the general store, the lumber mill, and even the freight company where Asher worked. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, Adelaide began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Asher, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But when she was 2 months along and there was no longer any doubt, she told him one evening after dinner. Asher's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He stared at her in shock for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her gently before setting her down with exaggerated care. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Adelaide, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy about it?" Adelaide asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Asher said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." He looked up at her, his eyes bright. "Boy or girl, I do not care, as long as you are both healthy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Adelaide felt tired and occasionally queasy, but nothing terrible. Margaret fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate well and rested enough. Asher became almost comically protective, insisting on helping her with everything and worrying whenever she so much as stumbled. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide finally told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," Asher said sheepishly. "I just want to take care of you." "Is that so wrong?" Adelaide softened, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "It is not wrong, but you need to trust that I know my limits. I promise I will be careful." "All right," Asher agreed. "But the minute you feel tired or unwell, you tell me. Deal?" "Deal." As Adelaide's belly grew, they began preparing for the baby's arrival. Asher built a beautiful cradle out of smooth pine, sanding it until it was silky to the touch. Margaret and the other women in town contributed blankets and little gowns. The townspeople had fully embraced Adelaide and Asher as part of their community, and everyone was excited about the upcoming birth. On a warm day in late May of 1883, just over a year after the stagecoach accident that had brought them together, Adelaide went into labor. Margaret sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Chen, who had delivered most of the babies in Snowflake for the past decade. Asher paced the hallway outside their room, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards as he listened to Adelaide's laboring cries. The birth was long and difficult. Adelaide labored through the afternoon and into the evening, exhausting herself. Sarah began to look concerned, and Margaret held Adelaide's hand, whispering encouragement. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Adelaide gave one final push and the baby was born. A loud, healthy cry filled the room, and Sarah announced, "It is a boy." Asher, who had been allowed in the room for the final moments, stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the tiny, red-faced infant in Sarah's arms. When the midwife handed him his son, carefully wrapped in a soft blanket, Asher looked down at the baby with such awe and love that Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes. "He is perfect," Asher whispered. He brought the baby over to Adelaide, carefully placing him in her arms. "You did it. You brought our son into the world." Adelaide looked down at her baby, at his tiny features and dark hair, and felt a love so overwhelming it almost frightened her. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We have been waiting for you." They named him James Asher Donovan, after Adelaide's father and his own. James was a healthy, robust baby with a good set of lungs and an appetite to match. Those first weeks were exhausting as Adelaide and Asher adjusted to parenthood, but they were also filled with joy. Asher was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring James to Adelaide for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just watching his son sleep. "I did not know I could love anyone as much as I love you," Asher told Adelaide one night as they lay in bed with baby James sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them. "But somehow my heart has expanded to hold him too." "I know exactly what you mean," Adelaide said, reaching for his hand. "Sometimes I look at him and cannot believe he is ours, that we made him." Life settled into a new rhythm with James. Adelaide cut back on some of her bookkeeping work to focus on caring for the baby, though she continued to keep the accounts for the freight company and a few other businesses. Asher threw himself into his work with renewed energy, determined to provide well for his growing family. James grew from an infant into a curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. He was a happy child, quick to laugh and explore, and he brought endless joy to Adelaide and Asher. The boarding house residents doted on him, and Margaret spoiled him shamelessly, slipping him treats when his parents were not looking. When James was 2 years old, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first. She was more tired, more uncomfortable, and she worried constantly about managing 2 young children. Asher did his best to help, taking on more of the household tasks and entertaining James when Adelaide needed to rest. Their second child, a daughter, was born in March of 1885. The birth was faster than James's had been, and when Sarah placed the baby girl in Adelaide's arms, she felt that same rush of overwhelming love she had experienced with her son. "A daughter," Asher said softly, looking down at his baby girl. "Adelaide, she is beautiful." They named her Emma Rose, after Asher's sister and Adelaide's mother. Emma was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. She looked like Adelaide, with the same delicate bone structure and light brown hair. James, at 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. As their children grew, Adelaide and Asher's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. They built a life together based on mutual support, shared goals, and genuine affection. The freight company continued to thrive, and Asher's partnership meant they were able to save money, and eventually, when James was 5 and Emma was 3, they bought a small house on the edge of town. It was not large, but it was theirs. Asher spent months fixing it up with help from friends in town, while Adelaide planned where everything would go. The day they moved into their own home, Adelaide stood in the middle of the empty front room and felt tears of gratitude. She thought about that frightened young woman on the stagecoach nearly 6 years ago, how lost and uncertain she had been. If someone had told her then that she would end up here, with a husband she adored, 2 beautiful children, and a home of her own, she would not have believed it. "What are you thinking?" Asher asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just remembering," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "Thinking about the stagecoach accident and how it brought us together." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Asher said, kissing her temple. "Even if it was terrifying at the time. Do you ever think about what would have happened if the coach had not crashed, if we had made it to Snowflake without incident?" "Sometimes," Asher admitted. "You would have gotten off at your aunt's boarding house, and I would have driven on to the next town. We might have seen each other around Snowflake occasionally, but we probably never would have really talked, never would have fallen in love." "So maybe the accident was fate," Adelaide mused. "Maybe it was," Asher agreed. "Or maybe we would have found each other eventually, accident or no accident. I like to think that some things are meant to be." They stood there together, holding each other in their new home, and Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Whatever divine hand or random chance had caused that stagecoach to flip on the mountain pass, she was grateful for it. It had been terrifying and dangerous, and had cost her everything she owned, but it had also given her everything she truly needed. The years passed in a blur of happy chaos. James started school and proved to be a quick learner with a particular talent for mathematics. Emma was more artistic, always drawing pictures or making up songs. Asher and Thomas Burke expanded the freight company, hiring more workers and taking on larger contracts. Adelaide continued her bookkeeping work and also started teaching basic mathematics to some of the children in town, discovering she had a talent for explaining complex concepts in simple ways. In 1889, when James was 6 and Emma was 4, Adelaide gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas William, after Asher's business partner and Adelaide's father. Thomas was a sturdy, cheerful baby who rarely cried and seemed content with whatever was happening around him. James and Emma were old enough to be excited about having a new sibling, and they helped their parents care for their baby brother. The house that had seemed plenty big when they first moved in now felt cramped with 3 children. So Asher began plans to build an addition. He worked on it in his spare time, with help from friends and neighbors, and by the time Thomas was walking, they had added 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Life was full and busy, and sometimes exhausting, but Adelaide would not have changed a thing. She watched her children grow, watched Asher become more confident and successful in his business, watched their little family thrive. She kept in touch with Asher's sister Emma in Texas through letters, and they finally made the journey to visit when their oldest son James was 8 years old. Emma and her husband welcomed them warmly, and the cousins played together while Adelaide and Emma became friends. On the 10th anniversary of the Stagecoach accident, Adelaide and Asher took a ride out toward the mountains where it had happened. They did not go all the way to the site, as the road had been rerouted after the accident and the old pass was no longer used, but they went far enough to see the mountains to remember. 10 years, Adelaide said, looking up at the peaks. Sometimes it feels like it happened yesterday. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago. We were different people then, Asher observed. Younger, less sure of ourselves. Now look at us. 3 children, a business, a home. We have built a good life. The best life, Adelaide agreed. She took his hand. I would do it all again, you know. The fear, the pain, the uncertainty, all of it, to end up here with you. I feel the same way, Asher said. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of a decade's worth of love. You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Still the best thing that ever happened to me. They stood there in the shadow of the mountains, holding each other, remembering and celebrating. Then they turned their horses back toward Snowflake, toward home, toward the life they had built together. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Asher settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. Their children grew and changed. James, as a teenager, proved to have his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. He began working with Asher at the freight company during school breaks, learning the trade. Emma developed into a talented young woman with a gift for music and art. She was kind and thoughtful, always helping her younger brother Thomas and looking out for the younger children in town. Thomas, the baby of the family, was growing into a sturdy, good-natured boy who loved being outdoors and helping his father with anything that involved building or fixing things. The freight company had become one of the most successful businesses in Snowflake and the surrounding area. Asher and Thomas Burke had built a reputation for reliability and fair dealing, and they now employed a dozen men and operated multiple wagons. Asher often joked that he had gone from driving a single stagecoach to running a whole fleet, but he loved the work and took pride in what he and Thomas had built. Adelaide's teaching had expanded beyond just basic mathematics. She now ran a small evening school for adults who wanted to improve their reading and writing, and she also tutored children who were struggling in their regular schoolwork. She never charged much, knowing that many families in the area did not have money to spare, but she felt fulfilled by the work in a way that surprised her. Back in Philadelphia, she had never imagined herself as a teacher, but here in Snowflake, she had found yet another way to contribute to her community. Margaret was getting older now, in her early 70s, and Adelaide had gradually taken over more of the running of the boarding house. The building still provided a steady income, and Adelaide enjoyed managing it, keeping the accounts and making sure the boarders were comfortable. Margaret spent most of her time in a sunny corner of the kitchen, knitting and dispensing advice to anyone who would listen. On a crisp autumn day in 1895, 13 years after their wedding, Adelaide and Asher took a rare afternoon to themselves. The children were all in school, the freight business was running smoothly, and Adelaide had caught up on her work. They packed a simple picnic and rode out to a spot by the stream where they had stopped on their long walk to Snowflake all those years ago. "You remember this place?" Adelaide asked as they spread a blanket on the ground. "Of course I do," Asher said. "This is where I washed your feet and wrapped them in strips of my bandana. Where I first realized I was falling in love with you." "You realized it that soon?" Adelaide asked in surprise. "I think I knew from the moment I pulled you from that coach," Asher admitted. "But this was when I let myself acknowledge it, when I stopped trying to tell myself it was just adrenaline or circumstance." He poured them each a cup of water from a canteen. "What about you? When did you know?" Adelaide thought back. "That first night in the cave. When you wrapped your coat around us both and held me while I slept. I felt safe in a way I had never felt before, not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Like I could trust you with all of me, not just the proper parts I showed the world. That is when I knew." They sat together in comfortable silence, eating the sandwiches and apples Adelaide had packed, watching the stream burble past. After 13 years of marriage, they did not always need words. They were comfortable in each other's presence, content just to be together. "You ever regret it?" Asher asked suddenly. "Marrying me so quickly, settling here instead of having a bigger life somewhere else." Adelaide looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once. Why would you ask that?" Asher shrugged, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Sometimes I think about the life you could have had. You are educated, cultured. You could have married someone wealthy, lived in a big city, had fine things. Instead, you are here in a small town, married to a freight company owner, raising children and teaching arithmetic." "Asher Donovan, look at me," Adelaide commanded. When he met her eyes, she continued firmly. "I do not want fine things or a big city or a wealthy husband. I want you. I want our children, our home, our life here. I am happier than I ever was in Philadelphia, happier than I ever dreamed I could be. Do you understand?" "I do," Asher said softly. "I am sorry. I did not mean to doubt us. I just wanted to make sure you were happy." "I am more than happy," Adelaide assured him. "I am fulfilled. I am loved. I am exactly where I want to be." She leaned over and kissed him. "Now stop being ridiculous and finish your sandwich." Asher laughed and pulled her close. "I love you, Adelaide Donovan. I love you too, you foolish man." As their children grew into young adults, Adelaide and Asher faced the bittersweet reality of watching them start to build their own lives. James, at 18, decided he wanted to expand the freight business into new territory. He had a sharp mind for logistics and a natural way with people, and Asher recognized that his son had the potential to take the company to new heights. Together, father and son began making plans for expansion, opening a second office in Holbrook and eventually planning to reach as far as Phoenix. Emma, at 16, had caught the eye of a young doctor who had recently moved to Snowflake. Dr. Henry Wright was a kind, intelligent man from Massachusetts who shared Emma's love of music and literature. Asher was predictably protective of his daughter, but even he had to admit that Henry was a good man who clearly adored Emma. Adelaide watched their courtship with a knowing smile, remembering her own whirlwind romance. Thomas, at 12, was still young enough to be mainly concerned with fishing and building things with his father, but Adelaide could already see hints of the man he would become. He had a steady, dependable nature and a knack for solving practical problems. On a warm evening in June of 1897, the family gathered for dinner at the house. It was a rare occasion when they were all together now, with James so often traveling for business and Emma spending time with Henry. Adelaide had made her best pot roast, and the table was laden with food and laughter. "I have an announcement," Emma said, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She glanced at Henry, who was sitting beside her, and he nodded encouragingly. "Henry has asked me to marry him, and I have said yes." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then chaos erupted. Margaret, who had been invited to the dinner, burst into happy tears. Thomas whooped and pounded on the table. James grinned and shook Henry's hand, welcoming him to the family. Asher stood and came around the table to embrace his daughter, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Emma quietly. "You are still young. There is no rush." "I am sure, Papa," Emma said firmly. "I love him and he loves me. And I am 17 now, old enough to know my own mind." Asher looked at Henry, who met his gaze steadily. "You will take care of her." "With my life, sir," Henry promised. Adelaide watched the exchange with a full heart. She remembered being 22 and agreeing to marry a man she had known for only days. Emma had known Henry for over a year, and she was making her choice with clear eyes and a sure heart. Adelaide was proud of her daughter's certainty. "Then welcome to the family, Henry," Asher said, shaking the young man's hand. "And congratulations to you both." The wedding planning began immediately, with Margaret and Adelaide throwing themselves into preparations. Emma wanted a simple ceremony, much like her parents had had, but with a slightly larger reception since the Donovan family was now well known and respected in Snowflake. The wedding was set for September, giving them 3 months to prepare. Emma Rose Donovan married Dr. Henry Wright on a beautiful September afternoon in 1897, with the whole town in attendance. Adelaide cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed with emotion as she watched her daughter marry a good man who loved her. Asher stood stoic and strong beside her, but Adelaide saw him wipe at his eyes when Emma said her vows. At the reception, as they watched Emma and Henry dance together for the first time as husband and wife, Asher pulled Adelaide close. "That could have been us if we had waited for a proper wedding with all our friends and family there." "I would not change a thing about our wedding," Adelaide said firmly. "It was perfect for us, small and simple and full of love." "It was not it?" Asher agreed. He kissed the top of her head. "I am glad we are doing this together. Watching our children grow up, become their own people, I could not imagine doing it with anyone else." "Nor could I," Adelaide said. After Emma's wedding, life settled back into its familiar patterns. Emma and Henry moved into a small house near the doctor's office, and Emma helped her husband with his practice while continuing to pursue her music. James spent more and more time expanding the freight business, proving to have a shrewd business mind and a talent for negotiation that exceeded even his father's. Thomas continued his education and began showing an interest in engineering, fascinated by the new technologies that were beginning to change the West. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1898, at the age of 76. Adelaide grieved deeply for the aunt who had taken her in, given her a home, and welcomed Asher into the family without hesitation. They buried Margaret in the Snowflake cemetery, and the whole town turned out to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of the community for decades. Adelaide inherited the boarding house, which she continued to run with help from a local widow named Mrs. Patterson. The income from the boarding house, combined with her teaching and bookkeeping work and Asher's share of the freight company, meant they were comfortably well off. Not wealthy by any means, but secure and able to help their children when needed. As the new century approached, Adelaide found herself reflecting more and more on how different her life had turned out from anything she might have imagined. If that stagecoach had not crashed, if Asher had not saved her, where would she be now? Probably still living with her aunt, perhaps running the boarding house alone, never having experienced the kind of deep, abiding love she shared with Asher. Never having had children, never having built a real home. On New Year's Eve 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Donovan family gathered to celebrate. Emma and Henry were there, along with their new baby daughter Sarah, just 3 months old. James had brought home a young woman named Catherine Miller whom he was courting, a school teacher from Holbrook. Thomas, now 14 and shooting up like a weed, was full of energy and excitement about the new century. As midnight approached, Adelaide stood on the porch of their home with Asher, watching the rest of the family through the window. Emma was rocking baby Sarah. James and Catherine were talking quietly in a corner. Thomas was demonstrating some new gadget to Henry. "We have had a good run, have not we?" Asher said, his arm around Adelaide's waist. "The best," Adelaide agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have plenty of years ahead of us. Plenty of years to watch our grandchildren grow up, to see what James and Thomas make of themselves, to grow old together." "I look forward to all of it," Adelaide said. She turned in his arms to face him. "Every single day with you is a gift, Asher. Even after all these years, I still wake up grateful that the stagecoach crashed, that you saved me, that we fell in love." "I am grateful too," Asher said, "for all of it. The fear, the uncertainty, the hard times and the good times, all of it brought us here." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Adelaide. I have loved you from the moment I pulled you from that coach, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Adelaide whispered, "always and forever." They kissed as the bells began to ring, announcing the arrival of the new century. Inside, their family cheered and celebrated. Out on the porch, Adelaide and Asher held each other and looked forward to whatever the future might bring, knowing that as long as they faced it together, they could handle anything. The early years of the new century brought both joy and challenges. James married Catherine in a lovely spring ceremony in 1901, and they settled in Holbrook, where James ran the expanded freight office. Adelaide and Asher made the trip to visit them several times a year, delighted when Catherine announced she was pregnant in 1902. Their second grandchild, a boy named Charles James, was born that December. Thomas graduated from school and, with his father's support, went to study engineering at the university in Tucson. It was hard for Adelaide to see her youngest child leave home, but she was proud of his ambition and determination. He wrote home regularly, full of excitement about his studies and the new ideas he was learning. Emma and Henry had 2 more children, daughters named Margaret and Rose, giving Adelaide and Asher 4 grandchildren to dote on. The house that had once been full of their own children's voices now filled with the laughter of grandchildren on Sundays and holidays. Asher, now in his late 40s, began to gradually step back from the day-to-day running of the freight company, turning more responsibility over to Thomas Burke's son Nathan, who had grown up in the business. Asher still went to the office most days, still made the big decisions, but he had more time to spend at home, to work on projects around the house, to take long rides with Adelaide. Adelaide continued her teaching and found new fulfillment in it as she got older. She started a small lending library in town, collecting books and making them available to anyone who wanted to read. She taught reading to adults who had never had the opportunity to learn, and she mentored young women who wanted to learn bookkeeping and other practical skills. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a surprise party. The whole town seemed to be there, celebrating the couple who had become such an integral part of the community. There were speeches and toasts, and more than one person mentioned the romantic story of how they had met, how Asher had saved Adelaide from the stagecoach crash, and they had fallen in love during their trek to safety. 25 years, Asher said in his speech, his voice thick with emotion. 25 years since I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She has given me 3 wonderful children, supported me in every endeavor, loved me through good times and bad. I am the luckiest man alive. Adelaide, standing beside him, felt tears streaming down her face. Asher has been my rock, my partner, my best friend. He saved my life on a mountain pass 26 years ago, but he has saved me in so many other ways since then. He has made me braver, stronger, better. I love you, Asher Donovan, more today than I did 25 years ago, and more than I can possibly express. They renewed their vows that night, with Reverend Kimball officiating once more. It was a simple ceremony, much like their original wedding, but somehow even more meaningful. They had 25 years of shared history behind them, 25 years of love and laughter and tears and triumphs. They knew each other in the deepest way possible, and their commitment to each other was stronger than ever. The party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and far too much food. Adelaide danced with Asher, with her sons-in-law, with old friends from town. She held her grandchildren and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had been given. As they finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, exhausted but happy, Asher carried Adelaide over the threshold just as he had on their wedding night 25 years before. "You are going to hurt your back," Adelaide protested, laughing. "Nonsense. You weigh nothing, and I am as strong as ever," Asher declared, though he did set her down fairly quickly once they were inside. They got ready for bed in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of shared routines. As they climbed into bed, Adelaide snuggled close to Asher, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for 25 wonderful years," she said softly. "Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me after knowing you for 2 days," Asher replied. "Best decision I ever made." "Best decision we both made," Adelaide corrected. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had on that cold mountain night so many years ago. The years continued to pass. Thomas graduated from university and returned to Snowflake, where he began working on designs for improved irrigation systems for the local farms. He was courted by and eventually married a sweet young woman named Anna, who was the daughter of one of the local ranchers. Their wedding in 1912 was a joyous occasion, and Adelaide cried again, just as she had at Emma's wedding. The grandchildren continued to multiply. By 1915, Adelaide and Asher had 10 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to teenager. The house was always full of noise and activity when they all came to visit, and Adelaide loved every chaotic minute of it. Asher, now in his 60s, had fully retired from active work at the freight company, though he still maintained his ownership stake and attended important meetings. He spent his days working on various projects around town, mentoring young men who were interested in business, and spending time with his grandchildren. He taught them to ride horses, to handle tools, to be honest and hardworking. Adelaide, also in her 60s now, had slowed down a bit, but still taught a few students and managed the boarding house. She had trained Mrs. Patterson well, and the business ran smoothly with minimal supervision from Adelaide. Her lending library had grown considerably, now occupying an entire room in the boarding house, and it was one of her proudest accomplishments. On a quiet evening in the summer of 1918, Adelaide and Asher sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. They were both feeling their age now. Asher's joints ached on cold mornings and Adelaide tired more easily than she once had. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family and friends, living in the community they had helped build. "You remember the first time we sat together like this?" Asher asked, taking Adelaide's hand. "The night after the stagecoach crashed in that cave in the mountains." "I remember," Adelaide said. "I was so cold and scared, and you wrapped your coat around us both and held me. I felt safe for the first time since leaving Philadelphia." "I knew that night that I was going to fall in love with you," Asher said. "I tried to tell myself it was just the circumstances, that I was just being protective. But even then, I knew. We have had a good life, have not we?" Adelaide said, echoing words they had said to each other many times over the years. "The best life," Asher agreed. 3 wonderful children, 10 grandchildren and counting, a business that has provided well for us, friends and community. And most of all, 36 years of marriage to you. 36 years since that terrifying, wonderful day when the stagecoach crashed, and you saved me," Adelaide said. "Sometimes I think about how differently things could have turned out. If the road had been just a little bit stronger, if the crash had been worse, if you had not been there. But the road did give out and I was there, and here we are," Asher said firmly. "And I would not change a single thing about how our story unfolded." "Neither would I," Adelaide agreed. They sat together in peaceful silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Adelaide leaned her head on Asher's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close just as he had in that cave so many years ago. "I love you, Adelaide," Asher said softly. "I have loved you for 36 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left." "And I love you, Asher," Adelaide replied. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me." They remained on the porch until full darkness fell, holding each other and counting their blessings. Their love story had begun with a crash and a rescue on a dangerous mountain pass, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring. They had built a life together, raised children, contributed to their community, and loved each other through all the ups and downs that life had brought. As they finally rose to go inside, Asher kept his arm around Adelaide's waist, steadying her as they walked. They moved more slowly now than they had in their youth, but they moved together as they always had and always would. Inside, they got ready for bed with the ease of long practice. Adelaide brushed out her hair, now more gray than brown, while Asher changed into his nightshirt. They climbed into bed together and Adelaide curled into Asher's side, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "Good night, my love," Asher murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Good night," Adelaide replied. They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had done thousands of times over the past 36 years. And as Adelaide drifted off, her last thought was one of profound gratitude for the stagecoach crash that had brought them together, for the cowboy who had saved her and then loved her, and for the beautiful life they had built together in Snowflake, Arizona. The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows as they inevitably do. In 1920, James and Catherine celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary and announced that Catherine was expecting their 4th child, a surprise late-in-life baby that brought joy to the whole family. Thomas and Anna had 3 children by then, rounding out Adelaide and Asher's grandchildren to an even dozen when Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Adelaide, after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake in her arms, Adelaide felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. This baby girl, carrying her name forward into the future, was the culmination of a love story that had begun with terror and danger on a mountain, passed nearly 40 years ago. "She has your eyes," Asher observed, looking down at baby Adelaide with a tender smile. "She is beautiful," Adelaide said, her voice thick with emotion. "They all are, all our grandchildren carrying pieces of us forward into the future." By 1922, Asher was 70 years old and Adelaide was 62. They moved more slowly now, and their bodies had all the aches and pains that come with age, but their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. They had been married for 40 years, together for 41, and they knew each other so well that they could often communicate without words. Their children were all well established in their own lives. James was running the freight company with great success, expanding it into new territories. Emma and Henry had built a thriving medical practice, with Emma managing the business side while Henry tended to patients. Thomas had become known throughout the territory for his innovative irrigation designs, and he was working on a major project that would bring more reliable water to farms throughout northern Arizona. All three of their children had given them strong, healthy grandchildren who were growing into fine young people. Some of the oldest grandchildren were already courting, and Adelaide and Asher knew it would not be long before there were great-grandchildren as well. On a crisp October morning in 1922, exactly 41 years after the Stagecoach crash, Asher and Adelaide made a pilgrimage back to the mountains. Their children had tried to talk them out of it, worried that the journey would be too difficult for them at their age, but Adelaide and Asher had insisted. They needed to go back to see the place where their story had begun. James drove them in his automobile, a modern convenience that still amazed Adelaide even though such vehicles were becoming more common. The road was different now, safer and better maintained, but they were able to get close enough to the old pass to see the mountains where they had walked together, where they had fallen in love. Asher helped Adelaide out of the automobile, and together they walked slowly toward the edge of the cliff where the stagecoach had gone over. James stayed back, giving them privacy for this moment. "It looks different," Adelaide said, gazing out over the landscape. "Smaller somehow than I remembered." "We were different people then," Asher said. "Young and scared and uncertain, everything seemed bigger, more overwhelming." "You were not scared," Adelaide pointed out. "You were calm and strong and certain. You saved my life, and then you saved it again by loving me." "You saved mine right back," Asher said, taking her hand. "I was drifting before I met you, Adelaide, moving from place to place with no real purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. You gave me a home." They stood together at the cliff edge, looking down at the rocks where the stagecoach had shattered all those years ago. Adelaide could still remember the sound of it, the terror of feeling the coach tilt and slide, the strong hands that had grabbed her and pulled her to safety. "Thank you," Adelaide said softly, "for saving me that day and for every day since. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me after knowing you for 2 days," Asher replied, repeating words he had said many times over the years. "Best decision I ever made." "Best decision we both made," Adelaide corrected, as she always did. They turned away from the cliff and walked slowly back to where James waited with the automobile. As they drove back toward Snowflake, Adelaide looked out at the passing landscape and felt at peace. She had made this journey once on foot, terrified and hurting, held up by Asher's strength and determination. Now she was making it again, comfortable and safe, still held up by Asher's presence beside her. That evening, back at home, Adelaide and Asher hosted a family dinner. All their children and grandchildren came, filling the house with noise and laughter. Adelaide looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt overcome with gratitude. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children were playing outside in the last light of evening, James stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the room. 41 years ago, they met under the worst possible circumstances. A stagecoach crash that could have killed them both instead brought them together. They fell in love fast and married faster, and everyone probably thought they were crazy. He paused, smiling at Adelaide and Asher. But they proved everyone wrong. They built a life together based on love and respect and partnership. They raised 3 children who adore them. They contributed to this community in countless ways, and they have shown all of us what a good marriage looks like. Emma stood as well, adding her voice to her brother's. "You have been the best parents anyone could ask for. You taught us to work hard, to treat people fairly, to value family above all else. You showed us what true love looks like, not just in grand gestures, but in the everyday choices to support and care for each other." Thomas was the last to stand. "When I was studying engineering, I learned that the strongest structures are built on solid foundations. You two built your marriage on the strongest foundation possible, pure love and commitment. That foundation has supported not just you, but all of us. Your children, your grandchildren, everyone whose life you have touched. We love you both so much." Adelaide and Asher stood together, holding hands, tears streaming down both their faces as their children toasted them. All the grandchildren cheered and clapped, and someone started singing, and soon the whole family was singing together. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Adelaide and Asher lay in bed together, exhausted but happy. "That was a good day," Asher said softly. "The best," Adelaide agreed. "Going back to where it all started and then coming home to see what we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you ever wonder how much longer we have?" Asher asked. It was not a morbid question, just a practical one. They were both getting older, and they both knew that their time was finite. "Sometimes," Adelaide admitted, "but mostly I just try to appreciate each day we have. Whether it is 1 more year or 10, I want to make the most of every moment with you." "That is a good way to look at it," Asher said. He pulled her closer. "However much time we have left, I plan to spend every second of it loving you. And I will spend every second loving you right back," Adelaide promised. They fell asleep holding each other, peaceful and content, surrounded by the life they had built together. Time continued its relentless march forward. In 1925, Adelaide and Asher celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary. The party was smaller than the one for their 25th, just family and close friends, but it was no less meaningful. They were both slowing down now. Asher had trouble with his knees, and his breathing was not as strong as it had once been. Adelaide had developed some arthritis in her hands that made it difficult to write, forcing her to finally give up her bookkeeping work. But they were still together, still in love, still finding joy in each day. They spent their mornings sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. They took short walks around town, stopping to talk with neighbors and friends. They played with their grandchildren when they came to visit, telling them stories about the old days and passing on wisdom gained from decades of living. Their great-grandchildren had started arriving as well. James's oldest daughter had married and given birth to a son, making Adelaide and Asher great-grandparents for the first time. Holding that tiny baby, Adelaide marveled at the passage of time. This little boy was her great-grandson, separated from her by 3 generations, yet carrying forward the legacy of love that she and Asher had started on a mountain pass so long ago. In the spring of 1927, Asher's health took a turn for the worse. He developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and he grew weaker and more tired. The doctor, who happened to be their son-in-law Henry, did what he could, but they all knew that Asher was 75 years old and his body was simply wearing out. Adelaide cared for him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her when they first met. She helped him dress and walk, prepared his favorite foods even when he had little appetite, read to him when he was too tired to talk. Their children visited often, and the grandchildren came to sit with their grandfather, holding his hand and telling him about their lives. On a warm evening in June, Asher asked Adelaide to help him out to the porch one more time. She settled him into his chair and sat beside him, holding his hand as they watched the sunset together. "You remember," Asher said, his voice weak but clear, "the first sunset we watched together, after the crash in that cave." "I remember," Adelaide said, fighting back tears. "I was so scared, and you told me we would make it to Snowflake, that everything would be all right." "And it was all right, was not it?" Asher said. "Better than all right. It was wonderful." He squeezed her hand gently. "I've had a good life, Adelaide, a very good life. And it is all because of you." "No," Adelaide said, her voice breaking. "It is because of us. Everything we built together." "Together," Asher agreed. "That has always been our strength. We have always been together from that first moment when I pulled you from the stagecoach." He turned his head to look at her, his blue eyes still bright despite his weakness. "I am not afraid of what comes next, Adelaide. I have had more love and happiness than most men get in 10 lifetimes. And I know that whether it is tomorrow or 10 years from now, you will be all right. You are strong. You have always been stronger than you think." "Do not talk like that," Adelaide pleaded. "You are going to get better. You have to." But they both knew it was not true. Asher was dying, slowly but surely, and no amount of wishing could change that. They sat together until it was too cold to stay outside any longer, and then Adelaide helped Asher to bed. He fell asleep quickly, exhausted from even that small outing. Adelaide lay beside him, listening to his labored breathing, memorizing the feel of him beside her, knowing that their time was running out. Donovan passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, with Adelaide holding his hand. He was 75 years old, and they had been married for 45 years. The funeral was the largest Snowflake had ever seen. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community, a successful businessman, a devoted husband and father. Adelaide sat in the front row of the church, flanked by her children, and listened as person after person stood to share stories about Asher's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. But the story Adelaide kept thinking about was their story. The stagecoach crash, the rescue, the long walk to safety, the falling in love. She thought about all the years that had followed, all the moments big and small that had made up their life together. She thought about how lucky she had been to have loved and been loved so completely. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Adelaide stood alone in the bedroom she had shared with Asher for so many years. The bed looked too big now, empty without him. She picked up his pillow and held it to her face, breathing in the scent of him, and finally let herself break down and cry. Her children wanted her to move in with one of them, worried about her living alone, but Adelaide refused. This house was full of memories of Asher, and she was not ready to leave it. She needed to be surrounded by the life they had built together. The months after Asher's death were the hardest of Adelaide's life. She had been with him for 45 years, had rarely spent a day without him. The loneliness was crushing, a physical ache that never quite went away. But she kept going, because that was what Asher would have wanted. She spent time with her children and grandchildren. She continued to run the lending library. She took walks and tended her garden and slowly, gradually, learned to live without him. On the anniversary of Asher's death, Adelaide made the journey back to the mountains one more time. James drove her again, his automobile making the trip easier than it would have been otherwise. They went to the same spot where she and Asher had stood together 5 years earlier, looking down at the place where the stagecoach had crashed. Adelaide stood at the cliff edge and spoke to Asher as if he could hear her. She told him about their great-grandchildren, about how the freight business was thriving, about how the town was growing and changing. She told him that she missed him every single day, but that she was all right, just as he had said she would be. "I will love you forever," she said to the wind. "Thank you for the most wonderful 45 years of my life. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a home. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." She stayed there for a long time, remembering and grieving and honoring the man who had been her everything. Then she turned and walked back to where James waited, ready to continue living the life she and Asher had built together. Adelaide lived for another 8 years after Asher's death, long enough to see her great-grandchildren grow and welcome new great-grandchildren into the family. She maintained her sharp mind and her kind heart until the end, a beloved matriarch who dispensed wisdom and love to anyone who needed it. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 75, the same age Asher had been when he passed. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Asher for so many years, a peaceful expression on her face. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren shared stories about her life, about her strength and kindness, about how she had overcome fear and loss to build something beautiful. They talked about her love story with Asher, about how a terrifying stagecoach crash had led to a marriage that inspired everyone who knew them. Adelaide Vance Donovan was buried beside her husband in the Snowflake cemetery, beneath a simple headstone that read, "Together in life, together in death, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." The Donovan family continued to thrive in Snowflake and the surrounding areas. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carried forward the legacy of love and hard work that Adelaide and Asher had established. The freight company remained in the family for generations. The lending library was eventually renamed the Donovan Community Library in Adelaide's honor. And for decades afterward, people in Snowflake would tell the story of the stagecoach crash on the mountain pass, and the cowboy who saved his only passenger, and how that moment of terror and rescue had blossomed into one of the greatest love stories the town had ever known. It became a legend, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected and frightening circumstances, and that true love, once found, can last not just a lifetime but generations beyond. The story of Adelaide and Asher Donovan became woven into the fabric of Snowflake's history, passed down from parents to children, told at weddings and anniversaries as an example of what marriage should be. And though the details might have gotten a little embellished over the years, the heart of the story remained true. A stagecoach flipped on a mountain pass, a cowboy driver carried his only passenger to safety, and in the process, they found a love that would last forever.